See, our theory, and I think it's a well-founded one, and I actually would call it a law, is that the body has the ability to make corrections if given the correct stimulation or to be left alone.
Welcome to the Evolving Past Alzheimer's podcast, where we are focused on bringing you information to help prevent from developing and improve from suffering with brain diseases like Alzheimer's and other dementias. I'm Dr. Nate Bergman, a physician and Chief Scientific Wellness Officer at Kemper Cognitive Wellness, and I'll be your guide on these sound waves. So whether you're a baby boomer who's worried that your brain wiring just isn't working like it once was, or you have a loved one with the disease, or you yourself have already been diagnosed and are wondering, what do I do now? You'll want to listen to this podcast. Each episode, we introduce you to the top doers and thinkers that are revisioning Alzheimer's, dementia, and just generally things in life's second half. If you have questions or comments, check us out on social media. To support us, go to patreon.com/evolvingpast and consider hitting the button and becoming a patron of this show if you find these episodes valuable. That's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/evolvingpast. So here we go. Let's get better. Welcome back to the show. So we're going to shift gears a little bit for us this episode, but I really think you guys are going to like this one. This episode, we have Joette Calabrese. She is an international homeopathic consultant, an author, an educator, and really sought after speaker. She is a certified classical homeopath. He teaches really around the world via phone and Zoom. And it's funny, my wife, my son, my mother, who's an MD, are all taking your classes, Joette. So we're happy to have you.
How nice to hear. Well, thank you for inviting me, Nate.
Even some of my sisters are taking some of the classes. They did like a work. My mom organized my wife and two of my sisters to kind of get together.
You're surrounded. You are surrounded.
And so I admit as a physician, I have a responsibility to patients, as you understand, and I admit that I have some skepticism. I would say in general, I'm sort of an optimistic skeptic. That's how I label myself. But I definitely have some skepticism around it. But when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia, which of course is, primarily what we're focused on in this show, I'm really open to whatever works, especially if it's safe. So, I'm really happy to have you here.
Well, that's where homeopathy shines, of course, is in arenas where there are no solutions. And in modern medicine, that leaves us great big gaping holes for us to fill in. Because besides surgery, which I believe in very strongly, I think it's a very valuable aspect. I think diagnostics, etc., can be very useful on a day-to-day basis for most folks, and everyone should have a doctor they can count on for diagnostics, etc. But there are big gaping areas where modern medicine just has not quite filled it all in, and so that's where I see homeopathy shining through.
Yeah, I want to dig in. I just tell our audience again. I have skepticism, but I'm pretty open. I'm pretty open to trying things, especially on ourselves. Myself, my wife, and she'll often break out some of the homeopathic remedies for the kids. And I think around our house we've had some successes that are were pretty impressive around allergies, some bloating issues for some of them. And so we've, some of these remedies you can find like CVS, Walgreens. I'm not sure if you're endorsing those. We'll talk about that, but things like arnica and oscillococcinum, if I'm saying that correctly. So just so people know, this is not something I wouldn't try myself. But Joette, my wife recently got my attention because she thought, hey, why don't you interview Joette for your podcast? Because she got an email communication from you guys, and it was talking about your own experience caring for your mother who developed dementia. And so that got me very, very curious about this.
I think we're going to, well, first of all, let me just answer that question that you posed a moment ago, and CVS and health food stores, etc. Yes, I think those are fine. Homeopathy is regulated by first of all, in this country, by the FDA. In fact, the FDA the inception of the FDA was started by a homeopathic physician back in the 1940s, and it was to protect homeopathy as well as other medications. Yes, I think you can feel pretty safe that what's generally sold on the shelves of stores in our country is safe to use.
So I might have jumped out of the gate too fast. For those that are uninitiated, Joette, can you just kind of explain what homeopathy is, maybe how it came about? Just a
Sure.
brief history kind of thing.
Yes. Well, I can give you an elevator speech that, when you
Sure.
only have a few seconds, I can give it to you that way, and then I can broaden that out a little bit and go into details. My elevator speech is when somebody says, "What is homeopathy?" and I say, "It's the medicine we've all been looking for. This is the
Mhm.
medicine that when your child has an ear infection, you took him or her to the pediatrician and you got antibiotics and said, whoa, that what got rid of that particular otitis media event. But, now he's got another one. And then 6 months later, he's got another one and another one. And now he's got chronic ear infections, and now he's got bronchitis, etc. So it doesn't feel as though we've gotten anywhere. And this was the medicine that we thought we were all getting, the one that can often, not always, but can often uproot conditions so that we're not left limping along with new condition from the antibiotics, etc., the fallout from them. So, and
Mhm.
homeopathy was, speaking of history, that's what's so fascinating. One of the main fascinations for most of in regards to homeopathy is how it came about. It was started in the 1700s by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, a medical doctor who found in his very busy and prominent practice, he was treating aristocracy and etc. He was well known in Germany, and but he found that the methods that he was using were paltry, and he was sorely disappointed. So he was. I'm not going to go too much into detail because we could spend the whole day on that. But I'll tell you that he developed
Yeah.
a method that had been noted through the centuries of using like cures like. So homeo, people think homeo means home remedies. That's not what it means. Homeo means like. It means
Same.
homonym. Remember synonyms, homonyms? Well, this means homonym,
Yeah.
similar, and pathy, of course, means pathology or illness. So it means similar illness. So what he noted was that when using a substance, especially a toxic substance that's naturally toxic in its original form, such as a plant, like say poison ivy or something, that when it's diluted greatly, it can also uproot, cure, antidote, whatever word, stimulate the body to correct a condition that has the similar condition as what the plant would automatically begin with. So in gross form, poison ivy, for example, would cause pustules, itching, restlessness. And we use in homeopathy,
Mhm.
we always use Latin terms. We don't use words like lunesta.
Yeah.
We don't come up with marketing terms. We use the real scientific term. It's called Rus toxicodendron. And when that is made in a homeopathic pharmacy, again regulated by many bodies, legal and medical, it's diluted many times. And after the dilution process has been completed, what we end up with is medicine called Rus toxicodendron that is used for a similar condition as what poison ivy would cause. What condition might that be? Well, one of
Hmm.
the first ones we think of is chickenpox. So when someone gets chickenpox, we
Yeah.
use Rhus toxicodendron because the pathology is similar, not exact. It's similar. Pustules, restlessness, itching. It can also cause joint
Yeah.
pain. And so when we use Rhus toxicodendron for chickenpox, it just calms it right down. The restlessness is halted. The itching melts away within short order. I'm talking about within a day or two. Now, are the pustules still there? Yes, but they're not pathological, and they're not still outbreaking. They have now calmed down. The body's been stimulated to make the correction itself. So it's not a suppression of symptoms, big difference. It is a stimulation, gentle, polite, intelligent stimulation, and the body just turns it around.
So again, I'm gonna play the role of skeptic because I know I'm sure you've dealt with this, my my kind of mind before, because I think they highlight some of the points here. Obviously, homeopathy, and I've heard you say this, in your own interviews and your own podcast, that it doesn't always work for everything, and even for something like poison ivy, it may not work for everyone. But in general, what we're talking about, and this, I've heard in several sort of physician circles and even outside physician circles, certainly just with friends. If you're essentially taking like a little sugar ball, right? That's highly diluted, and so often people would say, hey, isn't that a placebo effect? Meaning, isn't it working because people just think or want it to work, as opposed to it's actually having a biologic or physiologic effect or impact? How do you deal with the isn't this a placebo? Aren't homeopathic remedies a placebo effect?
People who say that the originator of those are the competition. Why isn't aspirin considered a placebo or Tylenol? or any of the
Well,
any
because
drugs that we
you
use.
so because those have randomized controlled trials, right? That would be the answer, that they have a placebo-controlled trial
Right.
where
Yeah,
they
so do
studied
we.
at something.
In fact, double blind is a homeopathic term. When Dr. Samuel Hahnemann began this back in the 1700s, it's exactly what he did. He double blind double blind studies in which he knew what was being administered. The person who was administering it had no idea what it was. The person who it was being given to had no idea what it was. And I have a repertory here, and my materia medicas of 220, 230 years worth of research that has shown that indeed that's exactly what we have here is randomized blind studies that have proven that. If people are interested in more on that, I don't discuss it very deeply because really what most people are looking for is a practical solution. They don't need to know how
Yeah.
far it goes. But if they're interested, they can go to my site, joettecalabrese.com, and look under resources and then click under studies. And I try to keep up on the studies that are still being developed, but there are many, of course, over the last couple centuries in which the studies are very clearly defined there. And you'll find these studies more often found in Switzerland, England, Germany, France, Portugal, Spain, and especially Switzerland, France, and Germany, and India. We don't find them
Mhm.
being done too frequently here. We have a different paradigm here. We have a
Yeah.
pharmaceutical industry that is very powerful. And speaking of the history, I think this is a fascinating aspect of it too, Nate, and that is homeopathy was in full gear up until the late 1940s. I've written a little book on it, and it's a pictorial book with images of all of the homeopathic hospitals throughout the United States. We had 100 of them, and conventional hospitals were numbered about 96 at that same time. And these were the big stalwart hospitals. These are the ones
Yeah.
I grew up in and have lived in Buffalo, New York, where we had, you see a big beautiful hospital, and in front of it is the fountain and the city square, and the traffic ran around. So homeopathy was the form of medicine up until the 1940s, and we had about 3 in Buffalo and 6 in New York City and several in Boston, and Hahnemann University, in Philadelphia, was named after Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. That was a
Mhm.
homeopathic hospital and medical school,
Yeah.
etc. But something happened in the 1940s, and I will bet that many folks who are listening will know what I'm talking about. There was a big shift in medicine. There was the miracle drugs that came
Sure.
forth, quote
Makes
unquote,
sense.
and one was
Yeah.
antibiotics and the other was psychotropic drugs. But up until that time, what conventional medicine had generally was surgery and aspirin, mercury, a couple of other rather toxic cocaine, those kinds of products. And then in the 1940s, these 2 drugs were developed. And with that, it armed the industry with the pharmaceutical industry with products that they could manufacture readily and charge well for. Now, when pharmaceutical companies manufacture their products, they own them, they patent them. They're synthetic. That's why they can do that. Homeopathy cannot be
Mhm.
patented. Why? Well, let's just use the example of the Rhus toxicodendron. You can't patent poison ivy. That's not allowable by law. So all the homeopathic pharmacies are doing, the manufacturing pharmacies are doing, is getting that Rhus toxicodendron, poison ivy, and diluting it and succussing it X number of times mathematically, pharmacologically, until we get to the point where it becomes a medicine. The homeopathic pharmacies charge $12 for a bottle, whereas pharmaceutical industry can charge 500, 1200, 12,000, 120,000. So for someone who has anaphylactic shock, for example, or is prone to it, the remedy, and I know we're getting off topic here, but I think it's fascinating to understand how this works. Apis mellifica will abort anaphylaxis. I've seen it many times. My students and clients have reported it to me hundreds of times. I've been doing this over 30 some years. But they could get an EpiPen that used to be $100, and of course now it's gone to $500 or $600. And what that will do, it
Mhm.
will halt the experience of the anaphylaxis, but it doesn't uproot the condition. Whereas Apis mellifica will not just halt the event, but uproot the condition, so that the next time that person is exposed to shrimp or strawberries or bee sting or whatever it might be, It's going to be a lesser version of that, using apis mellifica one more time or two or three more times, and now the person no longer has anaphylactic reactions.
So it's aborting the body's response.
Condition. Yeah, it stimulates the body to make the correction. The body's gotten off on some level, obviously, and we don't need to know exactly why. We can guess, but we don't need to know why. But it stimulates the body's natural ability to correct itself. See, our theory, and I think it's a well-founded one, and I actually would call it a law, is that the body has the ability to make corrections if given the correct stimulation, or to be left alone. But we as humans don't leave anything alone, do we?
No, not in our nature.
We can't help ourselves. We absolutely must throw pesticides on that lawn to make it perfect. We can't help ourselves. We absolutely must treat every headache with Tylenol or acetaminophen. We can't help ourselves. We want quick results, and we don't care what the cost may be, or we're not aware of what the cost may be in the future.
So that's a good point. The sort of toxic side effects are interesting, and certainly medicines are full of potential side effects. Not everybody's having side effects, but definitely. How about in homeopathy? Are there side effects? They seem so benign, meaning they seem so simple. Can people have side effects to homeopathy?
I wouldn't call them a side effect. A side effect is a result of taking something toxic and the body reacting. If you have a headache and you take, let's say, aspirin, it will most likely take care of that headache. But then you'll get, petechiae, potential hemorrhages in some people, ulcers, gastrointestinal ulcers, hematomas. It causes internal bleeding. That's the side effect. And it may not be the moment that you take it or within that day, but taken day after day for a period of time, we know that it thins the blood too much and causes potential hemorrhaging. Homeopathy doesn't do that, because this is the reason why. As we dilute that original substance, let's go back to the Rhus toxicodendron. As we dilute it and succuss it, succussion is a type of shaking. As it is diluted, 1 to the 100th power, 2 to the 100th power, 3 to the 100th, it's quite diluted. The toxic aspect of the original substance is dropped down, just as we know that anytime we dilute something, we're going to see the toxic aspect of most substances dropping down. And as it drops down, there is an area in mathematics, sometimes called Avogadro's number, where as it drops down, in comes the curative aspect. So in many ways, the more we dilute, it would seem, well, how could that be? We have fewer molecules. Well, it's a phenomenon in medicine. It's a phenomenon in botanicals, and even in math, where as we go lower and lower, and go more and more diluted, that there's more strength on the other end as it's coming up. So what goes up must come, what goes down must come up.
Yeah, so I have to say that's still a little bit counterintuitive to me, and that's okay. I really am.
Right. It is counterintuitive. You're absolutely right, Nate. It's well put. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, a lot of things in statistics though that are counterintuitive, and you end up seeing that they're true on some of those. So I'm open to learning more for sure. I wanted to shift. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with your mother? Your mother was living with you, as I understand it. She had dementia of some kind, and kind of, can you describe a little bit about your experience with her dementia, and then also how you kind of decided to use some homeopathic remedies with her and what you saw?
Well, my mother came to live with us the last year of her life because my father passed away. But I was very close to my parents. I spent every day with them. If I wasn't in town, I talked to them twice a day on the phone, and that's the way it was my entire life. So it was actually a joy to take my mother, and I wanted to do this, and it was one of the most powerful parts of my life. It's purposeful work. And so when I got her, my father had been taking care of her along with some caregivers, and she had been, as you know, in late stage Alzheimer's, there can be a lot of anger and inability to sleep and crying, and I don't have to tell everyone what this is all about. They all know all of this.
Well, it's useful to paint a picture of, because everybody's got sort of different levels and phases, and not everybody's the same. So I do think it's useful to paint a picture. So I appreciate you doing that.
Okay. Well, she had sundowners, of course, which meant that just
Yeah,
around that after in the late afternoon, she would get anxious and
yeah,
then angry, and it was very difficult to calm her down, and restless and wandering. And that's when she was still mobile. As time went on, it got more intense. Those sundowning times opened up to larger times in the day, and it was very difficult for my father. and
oh yeah,
and I come from a big fat Italian family, and I have a lot of cousins in my family, and many of them
yeah,
are doctors, and they were there at the ready, always willing to help, which was of course wonderful. Lots of care
yeah,
from them, but in then came the psychotropic drugs, and
yeah,
and so with that she became very sleepy, of course, and it calmed her down, but it was no life because she was just sleeping all the time. She would wake up just enough to eat for us
mhm,
to toilet her
mhm,
and dress her or shower and do what we need to do, and then she'd go right back to sleep again. It was no life at all. So when I got her, she was still on the
yeah,
meds, and I was more than happy to minimize those greatly. Now, I'm not going to tell people to do this. This is just what I did, and so we slowly backed off of the meds, and I replaced them with homeopathics. And so and of course, she was now wheelchair bound, and she couldn't walk, and her speech was she spoke, but as you know, the sentences were nonsensical, charming sometimes, angry other times, but still, it wasn't.
yeah,
She couldn't get her thoughts or put the thoughts to words. Slowly, as I said, we moved away from the
yeah,
drugs, and I replaced them with homeopathic. So now with anger, I use one medicine, and I use that twice daily. For the anxiety, which was actually the etiology behind the anger, as far as I was concerned, I think that was really the cause of the anger, was the anxiety. I used another medicine, and then of course,
what can you name what
yeah,
you
sure.
used?
For the anxiety, I used Ignatia Amara, Ignatia, Ignatia Amara,
Mhm,
200C, and I gave it to her twice daily. And that helped a great deal. I found that she became more lighthearted. She smiled more. She didn't have that little frowny face. Uh,
hmm,
when I
wow,
fed her,
yeah,
she was open to the idea of being fed, and she would respond with And she had not been doing things like that. She had not been appreciating life. I think she was so tightly wound in there between the disease
yeah,
and, as far as I'm concerned, and the medications. I think it made her little inner life quite difficult. And so that freed her of a lot of that. It did not cure her. I wish I
yeah,
could have, but her Alzheimer's started it was an early onset. And I'm afraid that at the time when it started, had I known then what I knew later, I might have been able to at least slow this down. I don't know that I would have been able to halt the progression of the disease, but I'm happy to just slow it down.
how do you figure that? I'm just curious how you could, but that's a bold, that's a universe altering, certainly globe altering statement. To slow it down is a big deal.
Okay.
It's a big deal in Alzheimer's research. So I mean, I'm just saying, how do you come to that, Joy? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that, I think it's a big deal. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
How can I make a statement that's so bold?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I feel like you say I could slow it down. I mean, that's
Yeah.
my
Okay.
essentially my life's
Sure.
work, and it's a
Yeah,
tall
it is a
order,
tall,
right?
but homeopathy can fill tall orders. I spent 8 years, and I'll tell you why. Not only my experience as a homeopath for over 30 years, full time practice. I mean, I oversee 50 cases daily. But I spent 8 years in a homeopathic research foundation in Calcutta, India. It was the Prasanta Banerjee Homeopathic Research Foundation. That's right.
Oh,
And
Banerjee.
there I sat knee to
Mm,
knee with senior doctors who each senior doctor was seeing 100 patients per day. And there were 12 senior doctors.
yeah.
So that meant there were 1,200 people marching through this clinic in downtown Calcutta every day.
Wow.
And at the end of the week, that's
Yeah.
7,200 people. But here's the gobsmacking aspect of this, Nate.
Yeah.
This is the best part. These doctors, Dr. Prateep Banerjee, who's in his 50s, his father, Dr. Prasanta Banerjee, who passed away a couple of years ago, and his father, so Dr. Prasanta's father, and his great grandfather, great uncle, had been using homeopathy for 130
Hmm.
years. So they were seeing 100 patients per day, per
Wow.
doctor, for 130 years. And they have the research. They have the research. Yeah,
It's pretty
yeah,
good sample,
absolutely.
yeah. But that goes back to the statement about, okay, do you think you can impact a neurodegenerative condition, right? That like
Yeah, 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 of course, of course. Well, I saw it all the time. When you see 100 patients per day, and I did it for 8 years in a row, I saw it. I
so
observed it. I saw what they were doing. I saw the history. I went through the cases. I observed the what I saw, not only the results of it, but the process of how dementia was being treated in Calcutta at the Homeopathic Research Foundation.
so this is super interesting actually, Joette. So when someone comes in, I mean, it's not like, in the United States and really worldwide at this point, somebody comes in with and they get diagnosed with Alzheimer's, they're offered basically one classification of medications, and if usually a second, depending on their stage and the prescribing doctor. But they're basically two medications that are FDA approved in the United States, and they don't
Mhm.
typically work much, but it's what we have. I take a little bit different approach, and I'm part of a group. It takes a little bit different approach. We do many things, but and we're trying from my perspective, the way I think about it. You're looking at, okay, what are the fundamental physiologic perturbations? What's abnormal about this person's physiology, and what can we kind of drive in a different way? From a homeopathic perspective, if someone has then early cognitive impairment, they're starting to have cognitive issues, how do you figure through like which remedy to use? It's not like you just have two approved things. You know what I mean? You're searching for a remedy.
Well, there are specific protocols, specific medicines that have been found to be used for Alzheimer's. Just Alzheimer's, okay? But as we know, Alzheimer's is a constellation of conditions. But there's a
Hmm.
baseline. There are a couple of baseline medicines that have been used over those 130 years by the Prasanta Banerjee Homeopathic Research Foundation, that have been shown, can halt the progression, and in some cases reverse it, depending on how severe it is, depending on the person. It's hard to say, but that's one of the main things that we're one of the main substances that we're using. But we're also using those medicines, like I said, for anxiety. I use Ignatia 200C because these are aspects of it. Just like if a child or someone has allergies, you're using a baseline medicine as the for to treat the fact that this person has the propensity for allergies in the first place. And then we use the medicines in addition to the homeopathic medicines, in addition to that, that are specific to that person. So not everyone who has allergies has anaphylaxis, but we use the baseline. So I actually think of it as a symphony, an orchestra, and the string section is carrying
Hmm.
the melody and the harmony. And so that's the baseline medicine that we're using for Alzheimer's, or that we're using for an allergic uh, propensity for allergies. And then every once in a while, or as needed, in comes the glockenspiel. And then in comes the triangle. So the glockenspiel might be that anaphylactic reaction. And the triangle might be hives that are
Hmm.
localized on the back. And in Alzheimer's, we're using the mainline medicine that is specific for Alzheimer's. And then every once in a while, we find, look at all of this anxiety. Now, one might say, yeah, but anxiety is one of the symptoms of Alzheimer's. Yes, but it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that we can't address it separately, particularly if it's noteworthy. So we would use a couple of, so for example, with my mother,
Okay.
sitting on that in that wheelchair all day long and taking them, having had been taking those meds, she had pretty significant constipation. So it wasn't good enough that I
Yeah.
backed her off of the medications. It had already been established now. So I used a homeopathic medicine for constipation and it resolved it. So we're looking at the constellation. What else is going on? She had a great deal of hair fall. So I assumed that it could be thyroid, hypothyroidism, but there wasn't an awful lot more indicated there. Although I've noted that hypothyroidism is, sometimes accompanies Alzheimer's. And so I considered using a medicine that's specific for hypothyroidism, but instead I used a medicine that's specific for hair fall, and her hair stopped falling.
That's. I mean, I'm being amazed right now, Joette. Honestly, I'm
And let me put it to you this way, Nate. I've been doing this for over 34 years and I'm still amazed.
okay, but I'm still skeptical. Like I want to see it work in some. You know
That's
what I mean? Like
okay.
I got to see it
Yeah.
work.
Well, yeah.
So I think that's that'll be on me. So if so, can someone just, let's say, caregivers listening to this, or someone that's in an early throes of Alzheimer's or some other type of dementias listening to this, is this something that, of course, as a doctor, this is not medical advice. We have all kinds of disclaimers around this podcast and this work. But if someone is looking for help, do they have to go to someone like you or someone you've trained, or can they just begin self-experimentation? You know what I'm saying?
Well, first, let me start with a statement that might help explain a little bit further. This is what Dr. Prasanta Banerjee turned to me and said one day when we were working in his clinic some years ago. He said, Joette, every disease or condition known to mankind has been successfully treated with homeopathy. But not every person who has it will find complete success. And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, we know that allergies in a 85-year-old man, in which he's having difficulty breathing and getting anaphylaxis, etc. How much time do we have to clean up the mistakes that were made previously, or whatever the aspect of how long this has been going on? But we get a 7-year-old boy and start treating now. We've got a good chance to get these allergies correct.
Yeah.
We've got more time. We've got a cleaner palate, so to speak. Generally, it's not always.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work out that in such a tidy way.
Sure.
So let's go back to the question because I forgot what your question was,
No, the
Nate.
question is just if people can get started themselves, or do they
Oh
need to
yes,
see an
okay.
expert, And it
Yes,
would make
yes,
sense that to me, I could make sense of it either way. If it's like, hey, just read the protocol and do it. But then, as a doctor, a lot of people could do a lot of things that I do on their own, but it's when they go sideways or something
yes,
happens, or,
yes.
that's when they need someone who's seen hundreds or thousands
Yep,
of cases and to have a
absolutely.
sense of,
Yeah, case management is
yeah.
key. There's no doubt about it. Well, when a condition is simple, and I can give a simple protocol, meaning exactly what medicine to use for that condition, the potency, how frequently it should be used, and over what period of time what to observe. I write about it on my blog, and I've been doing that every Sunday night for, I don't know, 12 years, and it's free. And so people can go there and just go to my name and look up the name of the condition, or just use in the browser, they just put Joette Calabrese and then anaphylaxis or hives or whatever they want to put in there,
Mm.
anxiety or whatever it might be, insomnia, and it will show up exactly what can be used. Now, however, when it's something more complex, in which case management really does matter, that's when I say, look, I think it would be a great idea to learn some of this through my blog, or I have study groups that are throughout the world in which we teach mostly mothers and grandmothers, but we have pharmacists, and we do have a couple of medical doctors and etc., chiropractors, etc. And it was great to learn together with a group on Zoom, is
Mhm.
how it's usually done. And that's a great way to do it. But if someone really wants to delve deeply into this, then I have courses. And the courses are online. And the one that would be teaching someone how to use homeopathy for mental capacity, for the onset of the potential of Alzheimer's, or other cognitive issues, would be my course titled Mindful Homeopathy.
Mhm.
And then I take people through the entire thinking process, how to approach this, when to stop, when you've made a wrong turn, not unlike what you just described, when to know when you might need help from someone more experienced. So I believe it can be taught to lay people, and I believe that that's where we need medicine to be. In my estimation, this is my entire focus of my work, is that I believe that healthcare begins in the home. and that people should not be running that quickly to get an expert's opinion for every little thing. I think there are many, many aspects of day-to-day health concerns, and even perhaps not so day-to-day, that can be resolved with some good, solid knowledge. And I think that's been lost in our society.
Yeah, no, I can tell you a short anecdote that's a little irrelevant, but it amplifies this point. I was reviewing. I was like a unofficial advisor to a friend of mine who is a software engineer, young guy, he's in his early 20s, and he started a company where they're basically taking cell phone
Mm-hmm.
data and predicting suicide and predicting relapse and recidivism. So relapse in terms of addiction, and he was shopping this around to to for research partners at some places you've heard of. And I was reading some of the responses from chief medical officer this, chief medical informatics officer that, as they were trying to get the protocols ready for like an institutional review board, just to get it sanctioned by the bodies that will allow for this kind of research to happen. And one of the chief medical information officers responded with, like, we've come to say, a lot of patients, a lot of people think that healthcare will start in a cardiologist's office or a or whatever office, the some ologist's office. They said really healthcare starts in the primary care doctor's office. And I said to my friend AJ, I said, AJ, does this make sense to you? Like, do you really think health starts in the primary care doctor's office? Like, health starts in the
Yes,
kitchen, in
right.
the living room. I was just like, it was
You
crazy. That
absolutely,
was crazy. Yeah, so
absolutely, Nate.
we've strayed. I
Absolutely.
agree with you to some degree. We've really strayed, and we sort of look to medicine as the medical community for all of the answers, when probably 40-60% of answers, maybe more, less, depending on what you're talking about, are available with our fork, or how we sleep, how we exercise, how we handle stress, and that's I'm not, but I want to circle back to the Alzheimer's and dementia, because you mentioned Banerjee, Banerji, protocol for Alzheimer's disease, and I'm looking at it, and it's, first of all, it's $37, which is unbelievable. There's very few things you can get nowadays for $37 that work, and it's basically 3 remedies. Um,
Helleborus, lachesis,
yeah,
hyoscyamus, and hydrocyamic acid. Those are actually there are
yeah.
four.
I mean, yeah,
You would never use them all in tandem. You would use one, utilize it for X number of weeks, observe, and case taking is very important. Observation is a keen observation is very, very important when someone's treating someone else, whether it's a physician treating, obviously, a physician treating a patient, or a family member treating another family
mm.
member.
And so case taking, what do you mean case taking? Is that just
Well, what I mean by that is that when you don't say, well, look at this, let's just try this. This is not vitamin C. This is not vitamin D. We don't just say, oh, let's just give it a try and see if it sticks. No, 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 no. I teach people how to take the case. What are you observing? What is the hierarchy of what are the hierarchy of symptoms? In other words, is insomnia one of the biggest issues in this person's life, or is that maybe secondary or tertiary? If it is primary, then we've got to find a medicine that has to do with sleep, because it would be very hard for this person to get well, regardless of what else we're treating, such as Alzheimer's, without getting sleep
Mhm.
established. So we lay out a hierarchy of the most important conditions, and then we observe, and I always ask people to assign a numerical value. How serious is this insomnia? Is it every night? Yes, it's every night. Okay, is it every night that they just wake up for an hour? I want to know all the details, and then I want to know how severe it is. It's acting on this person's life. They're waking up every night at 3 in the morning, and they're up until 5. If they can still have a day, the following day, that is productive, as productive as someone might be with this situation, then it's not as serious. But if, on the other hand, every time they miss 2 hours of sleep that commences at 3 in the morning and ends at 5, they are a bear, they're irritable, they're spitting angry, and we know that that insomnia is important to get resolved. And so we're going to look at a number on a scale of 1 to 10. I would say that insomnia in the second scenario is probably a 9 or an 8.
Yeah.
Because it's causing such a chain reaction. So now we need that to be recorded, and I teach people how to record it in these courses, exactly how to lay it out, so that in 2 months after utilizing this homeopathic medicine over that period of time, they can overlay, they can look at what was happening 2 months prior and what is happening now, and what are we expecting. Do we expect complete resolution of insomnia? Not generally. What I like to tell people is use this criteria: less intensity to the symptom, lasting for a shorter period of time, and a larger space between each episode of its occurrence. That's how we're going to determine that that was the correct medicine. And that's just one little aspect of this, but I'm breaking it down that way because, again, that's the glockenspiel. Even though the baseline is the string section, and that's Alzheimer's, these other constellations of aspects need to be considered as well.
So that's fascinating also. So we've gotten a couple of practical recommendations here. Anger and anxiety, which is, sundowning obviously is a huge feature and one of the most, it's just one of the hardest things for caregivers. I mean, once they get past the fact that this may be their spouse, this may be their parent, this may be a brother or sister, or, a very close friend who is, crumbling, their personhood is crumbling in front of them. And as you know, that goes with a terrific amount of grief. But then just dealing in the day to day is, can be overwhelming for some people. Anything that helps with sundowning, anger, and anxiety would be really interesting. So you mentioned Ignatia Amara 200C. You mentioned that. I'm sure there's other things you mentioned, the Banerjee protocol. Anything else that comes to mind is, in other words, can somebody do when they're consulting or when they're learning? It's up to someone wants to get trained. Can someone get trained on how to deal with homeopathy for heart disease or homeopathy for Alzheimer's, or do you have to sort of learn everything about everything and then apply it to a specific category like Alzheimer's or like heart disease or like cancer or something like that?
It depends on where the person begins. That first step is knowing where that person, what that person is capable of doing, and how far the condition has progressed, how many drugs the person is on, or whether they can, these drugs are superfluous, because some drugs truly are superfluous and others are necessary, or you certainly can't hop off of them injudiciously. And I would never recommend that. Again, I would like to make that clear.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
But if we're talking about something simple as cognitive memory, or let's go back to insomnia. If someone is waking at 3 a.m. every night, and it seems as though ever since that began, and they're up till 5 a.m, they can't get back to sleep. The next day, 3 o'clock shows up, 3 p.m, and lo and behold, in comes sundowning. It may indeed be a reaction to that, because one of the medicines that I often use for this condition is Nux vomica. It's a great word, Nux, N-U-X, and vomica, readily remembered because of the second word, Nux vomica. And it's a great medicine for a couple of conditions that show up. One is that there's anger. So Nux vomica covers anger. And I mean, there are many medicines in homeopathy that cover anger. But what we're looking is packing this all together and trying to find those unifying threads that cover many conditions instead of just one. So we don't treat one and then another, each with different medicines. We're trying to find one medicine that can cover a number of these, as I said, constellations. So Nux vomica is a great medicine for insomnia, but it also happens to be a fabulous medicine for anger. And it also happens to be the number one medicine that we use for constipation, and constipation that's especially associated with having been drugged, using drugs. So it's a great medicine to help antidote the ill effects of drugs. Now we've got, what is that, 4 or 5 conditions that Nux vomica can touch. Now we got something that we can sink our teeth into. It's a great medicine to consider for this.
And with these remedies, they usually come in, at least the ones I'm getting from like Boiron or whatever, they're getting, which is a company that makes them in France, and they come in these small, like
Bluetooth.
plastic vials
Mhm.
with about 80 pellets, and you're usually taking 5 at a time. Although I see that, I'm sure that's not universal. I'm sure
Mhm.
some places, you're having to take 2, 4. Is it? It's not always the 5 pills, is it? It's not
No,
always the
generally
5
it
little.
is. Because that's a
It is.
dose. Between 3 and 5 pills is a dose, generally speaking. Yes.
Okay. And then how long? I mean, I'm certainly, obviously, anaphylaxis is one thing and dementia is another thing, but let's stay focused on things like anger, insomnia, sundowning. How long would you venture that if someone got the right, they kind of nailed the diagnosis, if you will, they nailed the symptom that you're treating, how long does it take to see improvements?
Well, if someone has, if it is the correct medicine, insomnia will often start abating within a week or so. So once the
Okay.
insomnia starts to somewhat resolve, it's not going to be perfect. We're not going to see no sleepless nights, but we're going to see fewer of them because that's that larger space between each episode. That's what we're looking for. And when
Yeah.
it does occur, instead of it being from 3 to 5, now perhaps it might go from 3 to 4. So we've added an hour of sleep to the evening, to the night. And in
Right.
addition to that, the constipation is not so bad. What do you know? This person is now able to have a bowel movement every day or every other day instead of every 6 days, every 10 days, which is not uncommon for someone who is stuck in a wheelchair having had lots of meds.
Right.
So if we can see those shifting, if you can just shift the sleep and the constipation, that alone will lighten that person's personality. I have seen time and again, I don't know if you see this, but I see when I work with 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 people who have seizures, and they have seizures after the 4th day of constipation.
Mm.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if
What
they
do you think
don't
that's
have
about?
constipation, then they don't have seizures. Fascinating. So there is a connection between the central nervous system
Mhm. No doubt.
and the gut.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah,
definitely,
yeah.
definitely, definitely. And just to round things out here, Joette, this has been really fascinating and eye-opening for me. How about put yourself back? I'm not sure when this was with your mother, but put yourself back in the position of either your father when he was caring for your mother, or yourself when your mother moved back in with you. And you mentioned that was a powerful period, and it can be for many people. And we try to shift the script a little bit, just so people can focus on some of the powerful aspects of what it means to be a caregiver. But it is, it's taxing, as you know,
Mhm,
and it's exhausting for
mhm.
many
It
people.
is.
How do you have any suggestions on the homeopathic side for supporting the caregivers? This sort of unique stress that comes with um, being a caregiver for someone that has cognitive impairment.
Yeah. Well, it was harder, much harder on my father. He was also suffering from his own conditions.
Mm,
He
yeah,
was 90, and we did have people coming to the house, and my brother and I were there as pretty frequently. My husband, my son, so we were there, but it wasn't like a caregiver and my father who were doing
sure.
the heavy lifting,
Yeah, yeah,
literally and figuratively.
right.
But once, and I was helping my father, and it did make a difference. But when my mother came to live with us, um, uh, my it amazes me that my husband was right by my side for this. In fact, sometimes he did things that I couldn't do. I couldn't lift her the way he could, and
Hmm.
etc. But at any rate, there were times when it was difficult, and so for the caregiver, there are medicines, homeopathic medicines that are very valuable, and one of them is one that we've already touched upon, which is Ignatia. It's not just for anxiety; it's also for feeling overwhelmed, fear of the future, what's next. It's the position that instead of fluoride and chlorine in the water now during 2020, maybe we should put Ignatia in there.
Yeah, it's the same thing twice a day. The 200
Yes,
cc twice a day
yes,
type thing.
yes. 200C twice daily. That's right.
200
But I
c.
will
So
also say that if there is no shift, most people, if they're taking Ignatia, they say, "Oh my goodness, I'm back to myself." It doesn't feel like you've taken anything. It shouldn't, because we're bringing the person back to their rightful place, not a drugged place. So it's not going to feel like Valium. So don't think you're going to get really happy all of a sudden. You're going to be brought to where you were, where you should be normally.
Okay.
And so it just brings us home. But once that happens, then we say, okay, back off now. It's unnecessary. We don't use medicines superfluously. We use them when needed. So for this situation, we would use it only until the person, the caregiver, feels a little bit more comfortable. They too will be able to sleep better. They too will be able to have not be as irritable as readily. And then after using that, say for a few days, a few weeks, then they back off. They look for that tipping point. Now it's no longer needed. If it starts to return, the anger, the irritability, the frustration, the anxiety, insomnia, etc., time to resume the medicine again. But as we use these medicines, the difference is we are not suppressing, we are not forcing, we are not manipulating. We're trying to make the correction. And eventually this person will not need Ignatia 200 twice daily at all, or only very occasionally.
So that was a follow-up question I had. How do you know when to stop it? So you kind of answered that. So if someone, a caregiver, for instance, is okay, people are very obsessively thinking about what's going to be and how am I going to do this and how this can happen, and now they have 60% less of it, and they've been using it a while, a few months, and okay, they've sort of seemed like they've maxed out their benefit, but they've had a benefit from it, and they stop it, and then you have some return of symptoms. Do you go on it for another 3 months, or you
Yeah, I would
you
say
just take it?
usually we take it 1 or 2 months at a time, yes, and assess. And you know who notices? The spouse of the caregiver notices.
Oh, yeah. If the spouse themselves doesn't have
Yes,
dementia,
that's right,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Let's say they're caring for their
parent.
mother-in-law, their
Yeah,
father. So that's people who are closest to the person will often say, "Gee, you seem a little bit, a little bit more light." Yeah.
for your needs.
Now, on the other
Yeah.
hand, now let's say they use Ignatia 200 twice daily and there's no change at all. There's no improvement after a week or two, then stop. We don't use medicines unless they are doing good. And because we have more than one medicine specific for caregivers and for those who are anxious or worried or overwhelmed, then we would have to move on to the next medicine, homeopathic medicine, because these protocols that I teach generally cover about 80 to 85% of the population who suffer from it will be benefited by them. How do we know this? Clinical experience of 100 and some years with the Homeopathic Research Foundation in Calcutta. That is their clinical observation. So,
Pretty good.
yeah, it is. It certainly is. Most people, though, will say, well, I think I might be in that 15%. No, 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 no. Most people are not in the 15%. We all think that our concerns, our diseases, our worries are unique. It feels unique because not everyone around you is experiencing them simultaneously. But they are generally not unique. We are more alike than we are different, in my estimation.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's a great place to stop here. I very much appreciate your time and your wisdom here, Joette, and thanks for helping my family too. That's good.
Well, that's where you're going to learn this too, Nate. Let the women do it. Let them, and then you just sit back and observe. And we need skeptics. We need, and it's often the men, it's the fathers, the husbands, the grandfathers. Men are naturally more skeptical, and women are, in my estimation, naturally more open. So when we put those two together, it's that combination found in a marriage or between a mother and a son that gives us the balance so that we can be more available to ideas, new ideas, and assess them correctly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Everybody, you want to tell everybody they can find you? I think you
Yes.
mentioned it
Yeah. They
once
go to
earlier.
Joette, Joette Calabrese, Calabrese, Joette Calabrese.com. And there will be an infographic placed on our site, and you can go to, if you just go there, you'll find it. It'll be called, probably called Mindful. We haven't put it together because normally what I like to do is put an infographic together based on our conversation today. So I make sure I've covered these items.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Joette.
Yes, you're very welcome, Nate. Take care of yourself.
So that's our episode. I hope it was useful to you. Check out the show notes on iTunes or on our website where we've summarized the key points. If you find the information here valuable, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and leaving comments in the comments section. It will really help us bring this message to as many people as we can. If you have questions or comments, connect with us on social media. Finally, to support us, go to patreon.com/evolvingpast and consider hitting the button and becoming a patron of this show. That's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/evolvingpast. Thanks, and talk to you next time.